Great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this morning for a talk co-sponsored by Rutgers Tripods Institute, Data Inspire, and the Computer Science Department's Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Kostas Bekris, and I'm an associate professor in computer science working in robotics, and I'm a member of the Data Inspire Institute. It is a great pleasure to introduce Professor Moshe Vardi of Rice University. Moshe has a very long list of awards and recognitions for his work on the importance of logic in computer science and AI, model checking, constraint satisfaction, and database theory. I will avoid going over this award list as I don't want to take too much out of his time. But I can personally attest to his passion about teaching logic, given my experience struggling with Professor Vardi's week-long open books exam as part of his logic in computer science course. I may still be a little bit bitter about it. Since then, I have really enjoyed reading his editorial letters on the communications of the ACM, where he served as editor-in-chief for a decade. The journal has actually a devoted series called Vardi's Insights, where Moshe is highlighting his informed opinions on important topics related to computer science, and where he's increasingly focusing on socio-technological and ethical issues related to the prominence of computing and AI in our society. So I'm really looking forward to hear more about his take on the topic of his talk today, ethics washing in AI. Thanks, Moshe.
Thank you, Kostas. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about an important topic. The title might be a bit mysterious, but it will be clarified as I go along. But let me start kind of with a very, very quick history of AI. Many people consider the starting point of AI to be a paper written by Alan Turing in 1950 titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence, in which it's really a philosophical paper. It appeared in a philosophical journal, Mind. And the crux of the paper is an analysis: could machine be called intelligence? And he concluded the paper that his answer is yes. He said at the end, I believe at the end of the century, that will be the end of the 20th century, the use of words and general educated opinions will have altered so much that one will be able to speak of machine thinking without expecting to be contradicted. The picture there is not Alan Turing, it's actually Benedict Cumberbatch, but that's from the movie The Imitation Game. The paper is most famous for The Imitation Game, which in my opinion is the least significant part of the paper. Now you can see that Turing was quite optimistic. He said machine will be described as thinking by the end of the century. Well, I don't think anybody would say, well, my laptop is really thinking. I don't think we have reached that point yet. And this early optimism in AI, it was typical to the early age of AI. You can go back to the first decade, so to speak, and people thought, how hard can it be? Chess, they predicted will take 10 years to solve chess. General AI, Marvin Minsky said, give us a generation. Again, essentially generation from 1967 will be the end of the century. And this early optimism was followed by what's called the valleys of disappointments, and they became known as AI winter. There were decades where progress was very slow and funding was scarce. So there was, when I was a graduate student, AI had a bit of an unsavory flavor as a field, that area that overpromises and underdelivers. But that started changing, I think, in the late 90s, and a big milestone was in 1997 when IBM's Deep Blue beat Kasparov in a 6-game chess tournament. I was actually invited by IBM to go to New York and watch the first game, and Kasparov won the first game. And I concluded at the time that one day, I believe that one day computer will win, but the day has not come, and I left New York and came to Houston early, to my regret, because in the second game, Deep Blue won. You can see Kasparov walking away from the table in self-disgust, and he never recovered from losing the second game, and he lost the tournament. Then it took a while before we get to the next breakthrough, but in 2011, IBM, but this time it was Watson, defeated the two greatest Jeopardy champions, Brad Rudder and Ken Jennings, in Jeopardy. And this was, clearly chess was, people understood, was just brute force computation. But Jeopardy required a kind of historical and cultural knowledge. It was much less people viewed it as a big milestone. I remember at the time, I took it as a very, very important milestone that Watson defeated two Jeopardy champions. And then 2016, AlphaGo beats Lee Sedol in the game of Go. So we have another big breakthrough, AlphaGo beating a champion, Lee Sedol, in the game of Go. And this was considered a very important step because AlphaGo was not just using tree search. So the traditional, like if you go back to Deep Blue, it was searching the game tree, so to speak. But AlphaGo combined tree search techniques with machine learning. And in this case, we can say that AlphaGo wasn't just brute force computation. AlphaGo developed intuition for playing Go. And if you talk to really Go master players, they have deep intuition about good configuration. If you look at the game of Go, it's more difficult. It's a larger board. The pieces are only white, black and white. But good Go players have an intuition for what is a good configuration and a good move. And the idea is that now machines can develop intuition was a huge milestone in AI. And it was a response to a paradox that was said by the philosopher Polanyi in the 1960s. And they say, we know more than we can tell. The skill of a driver cannot be replaced by thorough schooling in the theory of the motor car. So machine having intuition is an important step in artificial intelligence. And indeed, after 2011, within a few years, I and many other people thought we are heading into transportation revolution. This is the Waymo car. Driving is about to be automated. This was considered just an impending another breakthrough, which is the automation of driving. But within a few years, we had some disappointments. In terms of autonomous vehicle, in 2018, there was two major accidents. Tesla car, the driver was killed driving a Tesla car, and it was studied by NTSB. And NTSB said basically that Tesla did not implement proper secure features for the Tesla autopilot. This was Tesla. And then with that, about the same time, and also in March 2018, an Uber autonomous vehicle killed the passenger. And the safety driver was distracted, probably playing video games. NTSB again said that Uber was at fault, but Arizona eventually charged the driver in negligence, but not Uber, somewhat mysteriously. And while our enthusiasm about autonomous vehicle has subsided, other problem in AI has emerged. For example, machine learning. In 2016, ProPublica did an analysis and showed that software that used to make a parole recommendation was biased against African American. And so since then, machine bias is something that people talk a lot about the problem with machine bias. And in fact, in 2017, Cathy O'Neil wrote a book, Weapons of Mass Destruction, How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threaten Democracy, a frightening look at how algorithms are increasingly regulating people. So our enthusiasm of AI has become much more nuanced and guarded. And in parallel, you had already a few years earlier, Nick Bostrom talked about the threats of superintelligence. He wrote a book, Superintelligence. Nick Bostrom is a British philosopher from Oxford. Superintelligence, Path, Danger Strategy, 2014. What happens when machines surpass people in general intelligence? Will artificial agents save or destroy us? And while many people dismiss Bostrom as a sensationalist philosopher, a book that came up just 2 years ago by Stuart Russell. Stuart Russell, very distinguished AI researcher, wrote a book called Human Compatible. And again, he asked, if the predicted breakthrough occurs and superhuman AI emerges, we will have created entities far more powerful than ourselves. How can we ensure that they never, ever have power over us? So we saw a sequence of, in one hand, enthusiasm about AI, but then growing trepidation about AI. And that has led to a phenomenon that has been labeled the techlash. And one instance of it is Peggy Noonan in 2017 writing a column about technology, and the column had to do something with gun ownership, and I think the case that she was making here was not a strong case, but nevertheless the sentiment is important. She explained why people own guns, and she writes, because all of the personal and financial information got hacked in the latest breach, because our company's real overlords are in Silicon Valley and appear to be moral Martians. Peggy Noonan always has a beautiful ear for alliteration. Moral Martians who operate on some weird new postmodern ethical wavelengths, and they'll be the ones programming the robot that will soon take all the jobs. So we went from enthusiasm about AI to techlash. And I'm not able, okay. And many people are viewing this as an ethics crisis. So here is a collection of titles from the mainstream media. New York Times, Tech's Ethical Dark Side. Boston Globe, computer science faces an ethics crisis. This was after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. New York Times again, some think chief ethics officer could help technology companies. VentureBeat, Facebook's back into for ethics in AI with $7.5 million. We'll come back to that institute. So ethics. There is a book came out on AI ethics. It's a popular topic these days. Artificial intelligence powers Google search engine, enables Facebook to target advertising, and allows Alexa and Siri to do their job. As AI is also behind self-driving cars, predictive policing, and autonomous weapons that can kill without human intervention. This and other AI applications raise complex ethical issues that are the subject of ongoing debate, and the whole book is about these ethical issues, ethics. Last year, just about a year ago, there was a pronouncement about the Rome Call for AI Ethics. And who were the early signatories? The Pontifical Academy for Life, Microsoft, IBM, the Food and Agriculture Organization, I think it's a branch of the UN, and Italian government signed as a first the call for an AI ethics. What is the motivation? Given the innovative and complex nature of the question posed by digital transformation, it is essential for all the stakeholders involved to work together and for all the needs affected by the AI to be represented, okay? And the value and principle that we are able to install in AI will help to establish a framework that regulates and acts as a point of reference for digital ethics. So more AI ethics. And you can see already here we have industrial partners, Microsoft, IBM, Deloitte is a consulting company, talks about should there be just one? We talk, does your company need a chief AI ethics officer, an AI ethicist, an AI ethics council, or all three? Okay, they're saying you don't just need one person, you need the whole ethics framework for your company. So again, even the consultants are telling you that you must pay attention to ethics. And Google has been at forefront. We are going to be, this is from Google, responsible AI practices. The development of AI is creating new opportunities to improve the lives of people around the world, from business to healthcare to education. It is also raising new questions about the best way to build fairness, interpretability, privacy, security into the system. And Google is promising us that they will practice responsible AI. And then you have the partnership for AI. The partnership on AI, and it's a partnership of companies and academia and other type of institution. And they have many industrial members such as Apple, Facebook, Google. The partnership on AI to benefit people and society was established to study and formulate the best practices on AI technology, to advance the public understanding of AI, and to serve as an open platform for discussion and engagements about AI and its influence on people and society. The partnership for AI to benefit people and society. And as I mentioned before, Facebook donated $7.5 million. So this was in the early 2019. Facebook and the Technical University of Munich announced a new independent TUM, Technical University of Munich Institute for Ethics in AI. And the announcement said Facebook Ensuring the responsible and thoughtful use of AI is foundational to everything we do, from the data label we use to the individual algorithms we build to the system they are part of. So everybody suddenly now cares deeply about AI and about ethics in AI, about responsibility. They are all very, very good players. They all want AI to be ethical. And that inspired in 2018, Ben Wagner to write an article, Ethics as an Escape from Regulation. And he titled it, the subtitle was From Ethics Washing to Ethics Shopping. And he writes, a strange confusion among technology policymakers can be witnessed at the present. In this confused environment, it is perhaps unsurprising that the idea of ethics is presented as a concrete policy option. Striving for ethics and ethical decision-making, it is argued, will make technologies better. While this may be true in many cases, much of the debate about ethics seems to provide an easy alternative to government regulation. And I completely agree with this sentiment. And really, that's where the phrase ethics washing, I took it. And I will elaborate on this point for the rest of the talk on how ethics has been used as an easy alternative to government regulation. And I want to start with an analogy. So just over 110 years ago, the Ford Model T rolled off the manufacturing line. And it was not the first automobile. The automobile went back 50 years earlier with steam automobiles in Europe, but it was the first mass-produced, mass-consumed automobile. It changed the world. It clearly changed America. The 20th century was the century of the automobile.
Passcode, then press pound.
Can I please ask everyone to mute?
Yep.
Steve, can you mute? Thanks.
Okay. Now, as soon as cars start driving in America, we discover people get killed. And for the last 100 years, we are trying to make car less mortal. We're trying to reduce mortality. And how do you know if you're successful? Of course, the country is growing. There are more people. There are more cars, more miles being driven. So clearly, in some sense, more people get killed. So transportation experts measure it by this red line, by the red line that says here, death per billion VMT, vehicles mile traveled. How many people die for every billion miles being driven? And you can see that we actually have done a very good job, and we have reduced mortality by a factor of, at almost 2 orders of magnitude. It used to be around 250 per people die per billion VMT, and now it's below 10. So very, very, very significant improvement. So we have done a good job. People still get killed. We still need to do a better job, but we have done a very good job. How did we do it? Not by one measure, but many, many different complementary measures. How to avoid crashes. Car should have mirrors. It's obvious now. It was not obvious 100 years ago that car needs to have mirrors. Anti-lock brakes, airbags, crosswalks, traffic lights. We have changed the architecture of the city. Laws, driving while intoxicated, driving while texting, actually now leading cause of mortality. So we have done it by a whole bunch of measures. What did we not say how we're going to reduce mortality? We didn't say, the solution is that all drivers should get ethics training. No, if we think that driving while intoxicated is a bad idea, we're making it illegal. We're not making it unethical. We're making it illegal for you to do that. So the answer was not ethics. The answer was public policy. In public policy, part of left it, where do we leave? Some option we leave to the car manufacturers to worry about. Some became mandatory. It's this balance between personal choice and regulation. That's what I call public policy. So that's my analogy. Analogy is to automobiles. Now let's contrast it with what's happening today. And we'll take one application of AI, and this is machine learning, in the justice system. So in 2017, April 2017, John G. Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, is visiting RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And he's hosted by Shirley Ann Jackson, the president, and they have a public fireside chat. And she asked him, can you foresee a day when smart machines driven with artificial intelligence says, will assist with courtroom fact-finding or more controversial, even judicial decision-making? And she said, his response, it's a day that's here, and it's putting a significant strain on how the judiciary goes about doing things. The New York Times referred to this phenomenon of algorithmic justice, an algorithmic that grants freedom or takes it away. So as the Chief Justice says, we are using today machine learning. And what are we using machine learning for? For many applications: bail decisions, sentences, parole, separating children from parents. These are all difficult decisions. They have deep impact on people's life. It's actually very difficult for judges to make this kind of decision. These are not easy decisions. We're academics, what are the big decisions we make? We fail someone. This is much, much bigger. Sentencing someone to life without parole, sending someone to death sentence. These are tough decisions for people to make. Why not delegate them to machine? And you have companies that sell system, and they promise to have a beautiful website. They promise advancing justice, embracing community. Who can object to this value? These are wonderful values, elegant website. Of course, proprietary algorithm. We don't know what's inside. So we have already seen that we have people discover that algorithms are biased against African American. Why? Well, because they learn from the data. And we have a long history in this country of inequity, racial inequity, also in the justice system, maybe primarily in the justice system. And in fact, that led to Michelle Alexander in an article in the New York Times to call it the new Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a set of laws from the 1870 something for the lasted almost 100 years until the civil rights movement to restrict the rights of black Americans in the South. And she writes, these advanced mathematical models appear colorblind on the surface, but they're also significantly influenced by the pervasive bias in the criminal justice system. And in fact, when people have audited this system, when they got their hands on the software, they audited it, there seem to be big claims. So Compass, which is the system promoted for this, claimed to do sophisticated machine learning based on 177 different features. But when you actually do audit the system, then it's a simple linear classifier with 2 features, and it doesn't do any better than any person with common sense would do. So it just makes it easier for judges to avoid feeling the pressure of making such profound decisions. And to demonstrate how ridiculous the situation is, I want to tell you about Fluffy. Fluffy is my dog, is a black lab. And let's say that I trained Fluffy to detect risk of recidivism. And I took Fluffy to the federal court system, and Fluffy was stated, Fluffy is uncannily accurate. You bring it to a person, if Fluffy barks, then there is high risk of recidivism. If Fluffy licks, then we are safe. But Fluffy does not provide explanation. Fluffy, you can see, is just a black box, literally. So should we allow Fluffy to make parole decisions? Should we give Fluffy ethics training? Of course, it's ridiculous. We all understand it. But really, there's no difference between a machine learning black box and Fluffy. The black boxes that make decisions based on some training. But if you're not auditing them, what do you know about them? And in 2018, James Laros and Chris Hankin wrote a column in Communication of the ACM, and they talk about regulating decision systems. And they wrote, disdain for regulation is pervasive throughout the tech industry. In the case of automated decision-making, this attitude is mistaken. And they say we are now making more and more, we are using automated decision system in more and more areas of our lives. And we need to regulate it. And they offer some basic principle how to regulate. For example, before you deploy such a system, you should audit it. And to me, it is rather shocking that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, who is in charge of regulating the federal courts, does not understand that it's not his job to be, oh my God, look what's happening. It is his job to manage it and regulate it. And somehow the system has been deployed with minimal regulation and minimal auditing. So you can see that the issue is not, are the system ethical or not, but really, are we using the system in an ethical fashion? The issue is not really, is AI ethical? The issue is we are really going to the decision making in society, societal decision making. Who makes the decision? And I'll take now a bigger example, and I'll take the internet as a bigger example. So if you look at today's internet, when I say internet, I don't mean the technical infrastructure of TCP, IP, etc. I mean the whole ecosystem. But if you look at especially the application like social media, it goes back to, and the web and all of this stuff, this goes back to the early 80s. I was a postdoc at Stanford, and we have the Well, which was a dial-up bulletin board, and there was Usenet, which was one of the earliest social networks. And the zeitgeist of the time was the hippie movement. You know, the 60s really happened in the 70s. It was the aftermath of the Vietnam War. There was an anti-establishment zeitgeist. The hippies were against the government. And the mantra became information wants to be free. Of course, information doesn't want anything, but it was a popular mantra. And so when T. Berners-Lee came up with the idea of the World Wide Web in the late 80s, he followed that zeitgeist, and his idea was there should be unfettered public sharing of information. The more, the merrier. And then, you know, the early days, we were intoxicated by this. All this information now is at the finger of your tips. But then we realized there was too much information. How can you find information? There's just way too much information. So there are various ideas. For example, Yahoo, people now may remember, Yahoo is a company that what was the idea? They says, well, libraries have catalogs. Let's build a catalog for the internet. And it worked okay in the early days, but it didn't scale. You couldn't build a catalog. The web grew way much faster than the ability to catalog it. So people said that doesn't work. What we need is search engines. And the first search engines were pretty bad, but then Google came up with a fantastically good web search engine. Now, how does Google make money? They started a company. They had to monetize it. But remember, information wants to be free. How does Google going to monetize it? And they had a brilliant business idea. Let's use what mainstream media is doing, advertising. So they said, research is going to be free. We're going to make money by advertising. But quickly they discovered that online advertising was very ineffective. People did not click. People have to click on this. Big banners, people hate big, you may remember there were big ad banners on the web, people hated it. So as opposed to, people don't mind, you have a big advertisement on a newspaper, you just skip it. If you have advertising on the TV, it's more annoying, but you can take a bathroom break. But the idea, Google had another brilliant business idea. Let's use micro-targeted advertising. We will match the ad to individual preferences. When you open a page on the web, and when I open a page on the web, we are going to see different advertisement because it's targeted to each one individually. How do you do this targeting? They gather lots of personal data, online and offline. For example, it leaked a couple of years ago that Google has an agreement with MasterCard of information sharing. So they want to know even how do you buy offline. You may forget now about buying offline because you haven't been to the store like me for a year. But we used to go to the store and buy things. Google want to know what do we buy offline. All of this targeting, how it is done, is using machine learning. Somehow people think that machine learning means, you know, making maybe judicial decisions. But every day, every time you open a web page and you see advertisements, machine learning is targeting the advertisement to you. So AI you're using AI every day, you know, hundreds of times per day without realizing it. You are the target of machine learning. I call it machine learning on steroids. Now, the fact is that Google has to be basically in a surveillance business to make money, was labeled in 2019 by Shoshana Zuboff for Harvard as surveillance capitalism. The Silicon Valley term was, if you're not paying for it, you're the product. You are not a customer of Google. You're a user of Google. The customer are the advertising companies. And what do they give them? They give them your data. That's how they make money. And Shoshana Zuboff talk about epistemic inequality. And what does she mean by that? So she wrote a column in the New York Times just a couple of months ago after the June 6 insurrection. She wrote, the coup we are not talking about. And she writes, we can have democracy, we can have a surveillance society, but we cannot have both. Why? Because today we live in information society, and information is power. And the question is, who knows? Who decides who knows? Who decides who decides who knows? And the answer right now is the people that hold all the answers are the surveillance capitalists. And they have tremendous power, though we never elected them to govern. And indeed, after the June 6th insurrection, Facebook and Twitter decide to finally muzzle up President Trump. And the cartoon here shows that we are thanking them for doing that, but already they're showing big tech kind of suffocating the Capitol. And because big tech has at this point so much power, and this was in the context of Gizmodo, the publication, asking many thought leaders the questions, are we living in a tech dystopia? And many of the answer was, yes, we're already living in a tech dystopia. So this was Google. What about Facebook? So Facebook, again, you want to maximize revenue. Revenue mean advertising revenue. So we need to maximize user engagement. Imagine that you rent a car and the car wants to maximize how much you're driving because they somehow make money they show you advertisement while you're driving. So they want to maximize your amount of driving. Again, this is machine learning on steroids because we want to maximize user engagement. And what we have here is social media addiction by design. What is going on here? Again, we want to is maximize user engagement. And so Atlantic article from 2013 talk about the social media is addiction by design. A recent article from NYU, just from February, social media use driven by search for reward is akin to animal seeking food, new study shows. So they said, again, that social media wants the users to be addicted, and it's by design. And an article, a Medium article from a couple of years, 3 years ago, by Richard Fried, said people don't understand. There was an army of psychologists that work with Facebook how to make this technology more addictive. And he writes, this alliance pairs the consumer tech industry immense wealth with the most sophisticated psychological research, making it possible to develop social media, video games, and phone with drug-like power to seduce young users. And the impact of this is horrifying. In October 2019, the CDC came up with youth suicide rate. What happened in the decade between 2007 and 2017? Okay, for example, you look at the group 10 to 14, suicide rate tripled between 2007 and 2017. These are kids. Suicide rate among kids tripled. And what is the cause? Well, it's very hard to do experiments on this, but by historical coincidence, the iPhone was introduced in June 2007 and Facebook app showed up in July 2008. And among kids, there is a whole issue of cyberbullying. Facebook social media is used for bullying. I mean, you know, we get sometimes nasty comments on Twitter, but this is nothing like what happened to kids. Something funny happens to you, you fall in school, and suddenly your picture is all over the place. So this technology is not harmless technology. Now, how well has this target advertising work for the tech industry? Like, this is Google advertising revenue. By now, it's about $150 billion. So it has worked extremely well. Target advertising has been incredibly profitable business for them. So suppose we send Sergey Brin and Larry Page to an ethics bootcamp, maybe in Munich, to this Ethics in AI Institute. Will they ditch Google's targeted advertising business model? I'm posing it as a question. I'll come back to these questions at the end. But in 2019, let me quote myself, I wrote, if society finds the surveillance business model offensive, the remedy should be public policy in the forms of law regulation rather than ethics outrage. But Google is stuck between, I would call, ethics facade, trying to present itself as an ethical company, and its very unethical surveillance capitalism business model. And this contradiction is very problematic for Google. So over the last few months, Google is in contortion. Okay, December, Timnit Gebru gets fired from Google, and then Margaret Mitchell gets fired, and now there is a movement. An AI Ethics Research Conference just dropped Google sponsorship, and just yesterday it was announced, citing privacy concern, Google say it won't use technology to track individual across multiple websites. What it will mean in practice is yet hard to say, but clearly at this point, Google, the internal contradiction of Google between saying, oh, we are ethical, we are responsible, and Google invented surveillance capitalism. This contradiction has come to the fore, and we will see what does it mean. I've tried to understand what will Google do. They're not going to give up completely on targeted advertising. This is phrased very, very carefully. Technology to track individuals across multiple websites. We'll have to see what does it mean, because so far, as I pointed out, this has worked very, very well for Google. They're not going to easily give up a business model that give them $150 billion a year in revenue. But we need to look even the bigger picture of this. People says, well, okay, yes, I give all my data to Google, but at least I get free services. But it's free is an illusion. Google makes $150 billion from advertising. Who pays for it? An article in Bloomberg by Alex Webb said the whole web pays for Google and Facebook to be free. We are paying for it because advertisers pay for it. They pass the cost to us. So we are paying this $150 billion. It's not free. It's just opaque. And we have, on top of it, mass surveillance. Now, again, some people says people understand it. They are giving their data in exchange for free services. Well, of course, we saw they are not really free. Not only that, most people do not understand it. For example, Facebook maintains a very detailed profile on each person. Most people don't know it. 74% of Facebook users did not know that Facebook maintains such a profile. In fact, you can reach your own profile. You have to dig through menu by click until you get to your advertising profile. And many people, when they see the profile, they are very uncomfortable. In many cases, they disagree with Facebook characterization. For example, I think of myself as a political centrist. Facebook claimed that I'm extremely liberal. And now I have a cognitive dissonance crisis. Am I a centrist, like I think of myself? Or maybe Facebook knows me better than myself. And I'm going to ask this audience here. How many people here use Gmail? I would bet it is 99%. And I'll ask how many people read Gmail terms of service? And this is a sophisticated audience. And if more than 5% in this audience read Gmail term of services, I will be very, very surprised. And I suggest that you do read it. You will be shocked when you read it to see how much you're giving Google. And beyond that, we can be critical as market, and there is a debate. What do we need of market? How to have market, not have market externality and market failures? But markets are very good at finding the value of things, okay? What is the value of my laptop? Well, the value of my laptop is the market decides how much people are willing to pay for a laptop. We have destroyed the value of information. So somehow information becomes something that has no value. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? We can discuss it, but it's not about ethics. It's about public policy. Now, why is there practically no IT public policy? Well, the IT industry hates it, and the IT industry is very powerful. They are now about 80, they have a market capitalization of now $8 trillion, and it's about 25% of the S&P 500. And they have always lobbied against regulation under the mantra regulation stifles innovation. A few years ago, there was the Security and Exchange Commission investigated Elon Musk for trying to use Twitter to manipulate the shares, the stock price. And Wire wrote, the case against Elon Musk will chill innovation. So suddenly, the regulation would stifle innovation. So we have an issue here with IT public policy. And in parallel, if you look what's happening these days, tech is getting more and more powerful. Over the past year, tech has become more powerful. But the reality is, tech save our butts. We had a public health crisis. We had all have to go to lockdown and etc. And but now we are able to work from home, to shop from home, to study from home, to teach from home. Technology saved our butt, but that gave technology company huge amount of power. The global pandemic gives Silicon Valley titans a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expand their power, crush rivals, and change their political fortunes. So we have very powerful tech industry that is very much against a IT policy. But it comes from a culture that I call a techno-utopian culture. In 1996, John Perry Barlow wrote a Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace. And somehow the philosophy was what happened in cyberspace stays in cyberspace. But there is a tight connection between cyberspace and physical space. For example, we now know that, we saw what happened in Texas when we lost the power grid for a week. And we need to worry now what happens if there is a cyber attack on the electric grid. And there's some indication that Russia has been playing with trying to penetrate the US power grid. So what happened in cyberspace does not stay in cyberspace. So the techno-utopian culture put us all at a huge risk. And the techno-utopian culture gave rise to the disruption culture. And the phrase disruption goes back to mid-90s, Clayton Christensen, a professor of business at Harvard. And he was descriptive. He showed how one technology disrupted the other technology. But again, it became a mantra of Silicon Valley. And Heffernan in New York Times wrote, ennobling destruction and sabotage makes the most brutal form of capitalism seem like God's will. And the industry went from disrupting to breaking. Facebook motto was, move fast and break things. And now we know, however, that this idea that Facebook had of frictionless sharing lead to massive amount of dissemination of fake news, misinformation, disinformation, extreme content. New York Times just has an article by Schuster, like, share, recruit, a well-armed white supremacist militia goes global with Facebook, all driven by machine learning. Because everything you see on Facebook, what do you see on Facebook is decided by machine learning. So we talked about move fast and break things. What are you going to break? Your payroll system, your travel reimbursement system? No, Facebook and social media in general almost broke democracy. The capital insurrection of June 6th was driven by dissemination of information, extreme content that gave rise to the Capitol insurrection. And so this leads to the questions, who decides? And what is the role of corporation here? What is the corporation of social responsibility of corporations? And this has evolved over the years. If you go back to the 1960s, corporation says, you went to a CEO would say, we have stakeholders. What are stakeholders? Shareholders, customers, employees, the community. But starting in 1970, Milton Friedman wrote an article that said the social responsibility of a business is to increase its profit. And that led to the philosophy of shareholder primacy. And so the focus was shareholder value, nothing else. And that led to so many negative results that in 2019, the Business Roundtable said, let's go back to stakeholders. And the debate continues. Who is doing this? Technology driving the future, but who is doing the steering? Well, right now, tech corporations. And technology has moved very fast. Public policy has lagged behind. Now, does regulation stop innovation? Yeah, it is true. But innovation is not the goal. Innovation is only means for societal progress. We must agree, innovation by itself is not the goal. And Benjamin Applebaum, New York Times, argued that the focus on corporate responsibility is misguided. He said, this is the wrong battle. We should focus on defining, instead of redefining the role of corporation, we need to refine the role of the state. He wrote, government remains the most powerful means to express our collective will. The necessary solutions create stronger incentive for good behavior and laws against bad behavior. He said, it's not about corporate responsibility, it's about the role of the state. So is ethics important? Of course, ethics is important. You know, you go back to the Rome Call, and they said all humans are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Of course, I agree with that. And what is the role of ethics? The role of ethics is to inform public policy. Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote, in civilized life, the law floats in a sea of ethics. Beautiful, beautiful metaphor. But the law is institutional. Ethics is not institutional. Without laws and regulation, ethics become a subject of philosophy books. Now, I teach a course at Rice, Computing Ethics and Society, because I want our students to go out with an ethical perspective. But this ethics is not a solution to the problem of technology out of control. And it's very, very clear that regulation is coming. Even the industry is calling for, over the last 2 years, the industry is coming for regulation. Apple CEO only said we need more regulation. Mark Zuckerberg said we need more regulation. Alphabet says we need more regulation. Microsoft said we need more regulation. Even the industry, all the CEOs says we need more regulation. They agree that regulation is needed. What we are debating is how to do it, because how to regulate is hard. We want smart regulation. When I talk to people from other countries, they say regulation is just opening for bribery because we don't have good governance. There are differences between the US and Europe. We may need international treaties. And of course, the biggest question around is big tech just too big? Tim Wu wrote in New York Times in 2018, be afraid of economic bigness, be very afraid. He said there's just too much concentration of power. Facebook was allowed to buy Instagram and WhatsApp. I think it was a big mistake. I think this, to me, I write it here as a question, but to me it's an easy decision. Facebook should be forced to spin off Instagram and WhatsApp. They bought it to suppress competition. It's very clear. But the biggest question that we have around is about free speech, and I call it the social trilemma. An article in the New York Times, why is big tech policing speech? Because the government isn't. We are uncomfortable with the government regulating speech. We're uncomfortable with Silicon Valley regulating speech. We're uncomfortable with nobody doing regulation of speech, because we know what happens when you have all this extreme content. We saw how democracy barely survived. And the problem with Facebook doing regulation is that Facebook rules to combat misinformation and hate speech are subject to the whims and political consideration of CEO and his policy team leaders. Do we want Facebook to be the free speech police? So this is, to me, the biggest, I would say right now, the social trilemma, or the free speech trilemma, if you want. So in a recent article in NextWeb about AI ethics, Tristan Green wrote, when we discussed the ethics of AI, we're discussing two simple questions. Is it ethical to build an AI for this specific purpose? And is it ethical to build an AI with these capabilities? But I think we must first ask more fundamental questions. Who benefits? Who decides? BMW used to have the slogan, the ultimate driving machine. And now they're facing autonomous and semi-autonomous vehicles. So the new slogan is, don't be driven by technology, drive it. I think this should also be the slogan of our society. Right now, we're driven by technology. We need to find a way that we're driving technology instead of technology driving us. And I want to end with almost a personal reflection. In the mid-80s, my son was a teenage boy, and talking to him was sometimes difficult. So I started reading his books, so I'll at least can talk to him about the books he was reading. And I read Ender's Game. And Ender's Game, this is spoiler alert, plug your ears if you haven't read the book, describe a boy, a teenage boy, that he and his friends think they're playing video games. What they don't realize, they're actually fighting an intergalactic war. When they win the game, they actually win the war, and they have destroyed the whole civilization. I think this is a good metaphor for us computing professionals. We thought that we were just playing with computers, and we had fun. It was a fun game. But now computing is the operating system of society. Now technology driving society with many harmful consequences. We have not done a very good job. I think we need to reflect on our social responsibility. And to me, if we want to talk about ethics, it's the ethics of our responsibility. We are the developer of this technology. We cannot shy away from its consequences. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you.
Indeed, this was very engaging. I'm sure the audience has questions. I think Vivek Singh already has posted a question on the chat. Vivek, do you want to go ahead and ask it directly?
Sure. Thank you, Moshe, for the amazing talk. I think of this talk basically as a call to action. And do you have some suggestions for early career researchers in computing-related fields? What would be their mission going ahead? What specific concrete actions can we take?
So this is a very good question. So I would say one is that I think every computer science department must have a course, an undergraduate and graduate level course on ethics. But I would encourage people to look at my website because in fact this week or next week I'm presenting a paper. Actually, my postdoc is presenting a paper at SIGSI on our tech course, tech ethics course. And the idea is that you can have a tech ethics course that spends a lot of time about talking about the trolley problem, and it's very sterile. To me, the real issue is not ethics by itself, but the impact of technology on society. And the goal of the course is really to awaken in the students a moral sense of responsibility. I want our students to go out and feel, oh my goodness, I'm playing with fire now. My product are not just some tech product. They will have impact on society. I want people to go to be very afraid. I want our students are going to be the workforce of the next generation. We want them to go out with a very strong sense of responsibility. I tell the students, ask me, what should I do? And I said, you vote. First of all, you vote with your feet. You decide which company you're going to work for. So in one instance of the course, we did an informal poll at the end of the course. We asked people, will you go work for Facebook? And 2/3 said yes, because it's well known that working for Facebook, it's technically engaging, they treat you very well. But 1/3 of the students say, I will not work for Facebook. And when I said, is anybody willing to explain the rationale? It was anonymous poll. I said, is someone willing to explain why not? And the person said the following. He said, I'm convinced that when I graduate, I will have many good offers. Why take the ethically questionable ones? I can find an ethical company to work for. So, if something, for example, it's one thing that's forcing, what is forcing Google now to change? After by now, going back to after more than 20 years of Google inventing surveillance capitalism, suddenly they're ethical. What's forcing them to be ethical? Their employees are forcing them because they have a kind of an uprising internally. People are realizing that they are working for an unethical company and they're getting very uncomfortable. So Google is feeling the pressure, not from the outside. Yeah, there is a pressure of fear of regulation and that, but they're actually pretty good at playing that game. They are fearing, what is their asset? Their asset is their intellect, is their workforce. And they are afraid of a rebellion there, okay? And in fact, people have resigned. And you saw that the ACM conference boycotting Google and the research, there are now a trend, people say they're not going to review Google papers. So there is pressure on Google, and they're responding to that. There is a debate in the community now. What should we do? For example, NeurIPS started now. If you write a paper for NeurIPS, you must have a section on ethical implication. Part of the problem for us is that it's not so easy because almost everything we do in our technology is a dual kind of usage. You can use machine learning for good, and you can use machine learning for bad. I think one of the attitude that we must share is the attitude we just do the technology. Somebody else would think about the consequences. That doesn't work. I mean, we have to find a way in the university to engage with, at RISE we created the initiative on technology, culture, and society. We're talking to the humanists. We are talking to the social scientists. We're starting a conversation. They need to be educated about the technology. They don't have the expertise necessarily to come up with to make policies. I'm trying to engage with the think tank because we need public policies, and think tanks have not done enough job to do that. I think we lived in our, so to speak, ivory tower. Inside academia, we live in ivory tower, and we must accept responsibility for our technology. And the answer is, I don't have all the answers right now. It's a quest. We all must engage in the quest to find answers to these deep questions.
Great, thanks. Ahmed, do you have a question?
I have more of a comment. It's an amazing talk. I think one part of the problem really is our lack of understanding of, in general, how technology has different scale than the human scale. And that has been always the case with any technology. For example, when it comes to computation, we are dealing with massive data that are beyond the human ability to understand. We are dealing with massive speed that's beyond the human scale. And we also now, with the internet and social media, we are dealing with a massive connectivity between people that are beyond what we can digest. And without understanding how this mismatch in scale between the machine and computation abilities and the human traditional understanding of the world, that's basically the source of the problem. Because as you mentioned, the tech companies cannot solve this problem, cannot even predict what the effect of their policies. And to talk about government doing that, it's a hopeless case, because government isn't, people in the government probably won't have that ability as either. So, and as you mentioned, if you leave it unsolved, it's also a problem. But there's no solution without really understanding the source of the problem. That's, I think, the problem. And I don't know what's our role in that, but having a section in papers about ethics is totally a joke. It doesn't help solving this problem at all. Just solve the peripheral of that. What is your thought about the source of the problem? Why we are dealing with this crisis to start with?
I think actually the irony here is I think we all miss something that we of all disciplines should have been aware, because very much I would say computer science has some great principles, and one of them is the quest for scalability. We understand that if you do sorting well on 10 elements, okay, very good, but it does use bubble sort. But that's not scale. That's not going to scale when you have million elements. Okay, so we all realize it. In fact, when you look at Google, how did Google become such a fabulously successful company? Well, there are two issues. One is a very, very good search engine with beautiful idea, the page algorithm. But then they realize they weren't going to grow. They need scalable infrastructure. Because just think how many queries a Google search engine gets today. And you get the answer in a second, in a fraction of a second. This is amazing. And this is an amazing technical accomplishment, okay, of building the scalable infrastructure. Now we have HCI that looks at human-computer interaction, but it doesn't look at scalability. People there look at how do computer and human interact. But the point, as you make out, the issue here is not how computer and human interact individually, but what is the impact on society. And this issue of how do, for example, I kick myself for not having this insight in the mid-90s, because from the early 80s till the mid-90s, I was a big fan of Usenet. Why? Because it was nice. You connected with people. You could ask questions. You had flaming wars. It was fun. In the mid-90s, I stopped using Usenet. Why? Because it became wide open. Too many people. Before there was only the computer science community. Suddenly it was a whole bunch of things. There was something called com.theory, in which people have serious discussions about P versus NP. And suddenly you had students posing questions from their theory of computation course. So the signal to noise ratio went way, way down, and it became a waste of time. So I just stopped. And I did not have the insight then that I'm having now. Oh, this does not scale. This works well for a smaller community of a few thousand people. it doesn't scale. And, you know, I grew up on a kibbutz in Israel. We never locked the house, okay? Because it was a group of, you know, how many people there? About 50 family, I think, maybe 200 to 300 people. Everybody knew everybody. But of course, something don't scale. But in computer science, we are very much about scalability. But it's the questions of not HCI, the human computer interface, but SCI, society computer interface. How does computing affect society? That is, to me, a big question that we did not realize. We need to look at the same way people talk about what is called warehouse scale computing. Okay, the whole warehouse is computing. Data center scale computing. We should think of societal scale computing. What does computing do to society? And we have missed it. I think we have just missed it. We are now seeing the consequences of this. And now we are trying to put, part of the issue now is putting the genie back in the bottle. And if you remember, the parable is genie does not want to go back into the bottle. So I don't have the answer. I think we all need to think very hard. You know, it's like with once the virus is out, it's very hard to tame the virus. Now we know, just the thing of what did we learn from New Zealand and Taiwan? Don't let the virus go out. Once the virus is widespread, it's very, very hard to tame the virus. This technology is a virus. It's widespread. It's very hard to tame it now. How do we, what is a vaccination for technology? That's a question we all need to think very hard. But it starts by saying this cannot be left to technology companies to decide. We as a society must have a say in what's happening in our lives. This laissez-faire, to me, with disastrous consequences is a, you know, part of what we know about the virus is that what you do affect me. It's not just to say, you know, this idea of freedom. I don't want to put a mask. It's my freedom. What you do affects me. What they do with technology affects all of us. So I think it's that this attitude, let's deploy technology first and see consequences later, is way too dangerous.
Thank you.
Anand, you have a question?
Yeah, this is I really enjoyed the talk. I had a question about specifically, you know, I work on differential privacy. I work on privacy preserving stuff. And so one question I always have for myself is, you know, in some sense, developing these, what we think of as private algorithms are, is a sort of washing, because in the sense that we're trying to say, well, you're safe now as long as you do X, as long as you use this privacy preserving algorithm, as long as your algorithm satisfies a fairness definition, it becomes fair. And so there's a temptation to make these technological fixes to what are actually fundamentally ethical problems. Should we even be asking these questions in the first place? Are these technology, you know, things that we should be developing? So I want to know sort of, what do you think about certain directions in research, or about certain like the sort of temptation to try and build a technological fix to what is essentially, you know, a non-technological problem, or a problem caused by technology?
So these are all socio-technical problems, and we try to find for them. We are technologists. So we're trying to come we are techno solutionists. Oh, it's a cyber. Look at cyber. In fact, I will have today a conversation with, in the context of CCC, the Computing Communities Consortia. We're trying to take a broader view of the issue of cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is a disaster, right? It's just getting worse. And we keep coming, you know, there is a community. I have colleagues, they keep publishing papers, and it's not getting any better. Why? Because it will not have technical solutions. It will have techno-social solutions. So we have had some conversation about what are the social aspects that we have missed. And we came up with regulation is one. Economics, for example, maybe if liability laws were different, then company would invest more in cybersecurity. What about international treaties? So there are many aspects of it that we have not considered. We keep try to come from technical perspective. Differential privacy is all about somehow your data will not leak. And this is what kind of Google is trying to realize, our data will not leak. But the bigger risk is, think for example, what happened in the 2016 election, that we now know it's pretty much a fact, that we were hacked, but our mind was hacked collectively by spreading the right amount of misinformation and disinformation to the right people. Okay. Now, it turns out we are all more susceptible to hidden persuasions than we are willing to admit. You know, we think we are this free agent, rational thinker. We are weighing the evidence. We make decision. We're all very susceptible to hidden persuasion. So the idea, if you give your data, even if it's only done in a way that the data never leaks, but Google enables the right advertiser to channel the right political advertisement to the right people for them. This is an enormous risk. That's really what we need to discuss. We need to discuss not does my data leak out, but what will happen when a profile of me is done in such a way, if Facebook can see that by my likes and clicks that I like this kind of conspiracy theories, then it tell advertiser how to advertise to me and how to sway me and convince me that that Hillary is eating children or whatever it is she was doing. That's what we need to discuss. And differential privacy is just talk about, okay, we don't want to leak any information. And that's it. It's an important technical aspect, but it's only a small aspect of the bigger picture of privacy. Why do we need privacy? To protect us. How to protect us from what? That's what we need to be discussing. And I'm not trying to criticize differential privacy. This is endemic. This is endemic to our field. We are techno-solutionists. And in many cases, when you look at the bigger problem, you realize it will not have a technical solution.
Linda Ness also had a question. Moshe, thanks for staying as well to answer these questions.
Hi. So my question is, how should computer scientists engage with politicians and members of the judiciary and lawmakers so that they are able, to formulate the laws and decisions that take these questions into account technically? I mean, they really don't know how to write the regulation. You've heard some of these, discussions with tech executives. They really, a lot of them don't know anything.
So I think, trying to work directly with politicians, I mean, that's, I think that there is a place where we need to engage before that, and I'm trying to kind of do it at RISE. So at RISE, we have an Institute for Public Policy, the Beggar Institute for Public Policy. It's a think tank. And what I'm hoping is that engagement there would lead to policy papers.
Well, I agree with that. Like in the conservative, there are many well-funded think tanks, huge think tanks, right? Funded, that, and the classic example of success is the Federalist Society, which, when one party is in power, literally controls the line of judges nominated. So since this is really a current crisis, I think you have to be more aggressive than that. You have to get to politicians right now. There are some, for example, in the House that are trying to formulate laws to regulate tech, and they really don't know how to do it.
They don't know how to do it. So,
and how are you going to educate John Roberts? I mean, the crisis is urgent.
No. So what for example, you can imagine that the CRA would create a workshop in which trying to create awareness of some of these, I would say, I don't want to call them ethical issues, societal issues, and they don't invite politicians usually, but they invite staffers, because very often these bills are not written by politicians. Politicians give the high level direction.
Staffers and law clerks and things
Work
like
with
that,
staffers and law clerks. I think, for example, about there would be a good role for CRA, and not even lobby for specific policies, but just kind of create a more, it cannot be partisan, but you can say, this is what happened. If you use machine learning, these are the risks. These are the biases that will do it. And here are guidelines for how you should audit such systems. We need to get out of our ivory tower. And I agree with you. I mean, my experience talking to politicians is just, I have no experience talking to politicians. But I think they are level beyond that. I think we can do something by educating them, to explain to them that the technology as it is already harmful. And what to do, what policy to take, that I don't think I have the expertise to advocate specific policies. I can engage with other people, and this has to be a conversation with people who understand better policy, not policy making, which is politics, but what policies to advocate. And this is, there are people, there are public policy there are some academic school for public policy. They are in Kennedy School. There are schools. There are people who specialize in public policy.
I think that you're not taking enough responsibility right now. I really don't. I think that, for example, suppose you want to break up Facebook, right? Exactly how do you do that? Okay. So unless leading computer scientists come forward and speak to technical issues, it won't happen. And they have to be right there in the throw. I mean, you should also pursue this more, long-term approach of writing papers and things like that. They do have a lot of impact, but I think, for example, just look up a list of people in the House. There are a few people in the House of Representatives who actually are trying to write laws right now for regulating social networks, right? But they're severely lacking in expertise, and you can contact them directly, and they might send their plans to go. I think it's much more urgent.
I have written letters that are ignored. So, one of the things is they call on people whom they recognize the name. I don't have name recognition in that community. I said that's why we need to partner. We need to partner with people who talk about policy. Again, I'm not a policy expert. I can talk about dangers. I'm trying to do kind of like social responsibility, consciousness raising. But when it comes about, for example, about splitting companies, I don't have the expertise. I mean, there are people that can talk. If I were to give a testimony, I will not be able to answer questions that people will ask me. Okay. So I think I'm happy to be involved in that. I'm trying to take responsibility for our actions. But I don't think we can do it by ourselves. I agree with you that we need to reach politicians.
So, excuse me, but most people that are addressed to ask these questions cannot answer them. So I would think your answers would be at least as good as most of them. I mean, anyway, so that's enough. I just want to push you harder.
Okay, I always welcome being pushed.
Thanks. Rama, you had some comments in the chat that have a question.
Hi, Moshe, fantastic talk. And I had, we're looking more and more AI and medicine. Okay, so ethics is becoming very important there because how decisions are made, it affects the health and all that. In fact, Mayo Clinic wants to start an AI and informatics department. Wow. So that's going on. My second point is, a lot of people own stocks in Google and Facebook, and you can maybe affect their behavior through that, because you talk about $154 billion, but that probably translates into the value of stocks that people own. So that's also an issue. We have a collective responsibility. Remember, in the good old 80s, there were stock disinvestment from South Africa because of apartheid and so on, and that had some impact. So that has been shown. So maybe people should stop investing and buying stocks in Google and Facebook if they don't like the policy. I think that will have a direct impact on them.
So there is a concept of ethical investing, and there are now in the management community, they have an acronym. Let's see if I can think of it. It's sustainability, equity, SE. And governance. I think SEG, it's called SEG, partly saying that the auditing company should start pay attention not just to the financial aspect of a company, but other aspects as well in terms of sustainability, equity, and governance, or maybe sustainability, ethics, and governance. So there is a conversation in the business community about the greater responsibility of company. But again, there is a cynical view that when the Business Roundtable said, okay, we are going to go back to stakeholder policy instead of shareholder policy, that they're trying to basically avert regulation. They basically are telling, okay, we understand that we are behaved badly. From now on, we will behave better. Just don't regulate us. So again, remember what the article from New York Times by Applebaum says. It's not about the role of the corporation. Corporation exists. Corporation gets a license from society to exist. For example, especially think of the limited liability corporation. Why should shareholders have limited liability? There was a legal invention with a practical thing in mind. People who invest more if the only thing that they can lose is the stock shares and nothing else. It's limited liability. But this was something as a society we decided to give them that limited liability. So corporations are societal invention, and society should decide what are the role and responsibilities of societies, of corporations. So to me, actually, this is one of the biggest issues right now. People are talking now about a constitutional amendment to repeal Citizens United, to say that corporations are not people and therefore they should not be entitled to certain rights like free speech of people. Nobody thinks corporations should vote. For some reason, the Supreme Court decided, but what many people consider one of the worst decisions of the Supreme Court in the past generation is that that corporations are entitled to free speech like people. But I think just repealing Citizens United, in my opinion, is too little. We need to, corporations are now enormously powerful. And there, you know, if you look what is now driving society, you can say, is it government or corporation? And one could argue the corporation have more power these days than the government, especially after the beginning. In fact, if you want to kind of take a big 50,000 feet view, where we are today, it's a combination of two things. Two things happened in 1981. The PC was introduced in 1981, which is, you can say, is the beginning of the more modern age of computing, personal computing, and the proliferation of computing. And Reagan became president and turned back and moved the United States into neoliberalism, which is still the regime we are under, which is laissez-faire, let company do, minimize regulation. And so under this condition, we have companies that were fairly unrestricted in what they can do, and technology exploded. And what we really need, in my opinion, is to go back to the drawing board, and this is something that I would not presume to have the expertise to do, and to say, let's define precisely what are the roles and responsibility of corporations. We as a society should decide it, not the market should decide it. So I told you before, I tell students they can vote with their feet by deciding which company to work for. I also tell them they have a responsibility to vote with their fingers. They're not just consumers and producers, they're also voters. They can as they can write letters to politicians, they can vote for the right politician. They understand the technology, they understand the risk they should understand the risk of this technology, and they as citizens should advocate for the right policies.
So if I could throw in a question here, Moshe, great talk. We've been trying for 50 years or more, since the first Earth Day, to make corporations responsible for what they do to the environment. And in fact, the same discussion that you had led today was one that led to the first Earth Day, making corporations more socially responsible. Why has that failed? And what can we learn from the failures there that would make us think we could be more successful now? Or maybe there's a way of combining those efforts and others that are aimed at making corporations responsible, so it's not just technology.
So I think we can learn, for example, from what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement, the BLM movements. So on one hand, I just heard a report on the news, I think it was last night, that the BLM movement was successful. That if you look at now black people killed by police, the number seems to be going down. There is a heightened awareness that and tightened rules. I think it can go farther. I think we can learn from that protests do change politics. They have impact on politics. We also can learn that they can go wrong. Protests can go wrong. I think part of the fact that the protests became violent, I think it backfired on the Democrats. I mean, it's explained, I think, why the Democrats did not do very well in, it's one of the factors, I think, why the Democrats did not very well in what they call the down ticket ballots in the House, the low seats in the House, for example. So it's a balancing line. You want to have, I think, protests, but they have to be peaceful protests. I'm actually encouraged, I don't know, it might be too late, but when you talk to our students seem to be right now, their awareness of climate change is just a whole degree higher than us. And the reason I think is very simple. I think, okay, climate change is the problem. I just spent a week without water and power, so I can see what happens. But it was still at the level of a colossal inconvenience. I have to worry about, who knows, maybe the next 20 years, okay? The students have to worry about the next 60, 70 years. And they take the issue much more seriously. So I heard they talk about social change, and they have an answer to people need to go out to the street. That's how you actually push for a sharp social change. And they have a number, they have actually estimated the number, how many people needs to go out. I think I forgot exactly, but it was something like at least 3% of the population have to be willing to go out to the street to affect a social change. So in the United States, we're talking about 10 million people. Imagine that somebody takes this seriously and says, we're going to have peaceful rallies for climate change. 10 million people in the United States. You do it across, somebody has to organize it very well, okay? I think this is a subject over which many people, I think it's maybe the only subject over which you can get 10 million people to go out and says, we must change how we behave. But I would say we need to start for this in our discipline. I've said, this practice that right now every paper entail travel. It's crazy. It's just morally unacceptable anymore to say that every paper in computer science, somebody will have to travel. And the style of my research is many of the papers have to go to Europe. I'm not talking about the money. Every paper cost me $3,000 to pay someone to go to Europe to present a paper. But this, I don't think it's morally acceptable anymore to say the way we publish paper is in conferences where we travel. So we need to, before we want society to change, there is a song of Michael Jackson, The Man in the Mirror. And he says, you want to change the world, look at the mirror and change the man in the mirror. And we need to look at the mirror and start saying, how does our discipline, is our discipline socially responsible? And I focused here, of course, just on one aspect of our social responsibility, but climate change is a huge issue, and our responsibility to climate change is another thing that we should all take responsibility for.
I think James has a related question on responsibility on the academic side.
Hi, Moshe. Fantastic talk. Bringing the point closer to home, I think that universities may be an ecosystem that we could influence more than the whole society by itself. And many of the things that you mentioned are happening within these institutions. And let me give you just a very concrete test case. Emails. Some of these institutions are imposing that all of the faculty should use email X or Y and Z. It's not that a Trojan horse, and all these grandiose goals that we would like to achieve in society, could they be achieved within university settings? Could you comment on that, please?
So I think that as scientists, in some sense, we missed our social responsibility in the following way. So the world that we live in for science, I'm not talking about, let's separate conversation about humanities and social science, but for science and engineering, the world that we live in today was very much shaped by a very important article about 75 years ago by Vannevar Bush, Science, the Endless Frontier. Incredibly important. It was a memo that he wrote to President Truman, where he made the argument that basic science, basic research is of national significance because it contributes to national security. And you can say that in World War II, we had technical developments as the radar and atomic bomb that play a key role in winning the war. In health, we understand today, of course, we are investing billions of dollars in health, and also for economic development. So Vannevar Bush made the case that basic research is in the national interest, and that led to the foundation of NIH and NSF. What Vannevar Bush did not address very well are the possibility, two things. How do we ensure that basic research, so the goal was not curiosity-driven research. Curiosity-driven research is means to an end. What is the end of Vannevar Bush? It is the social good, the common good. This will be in the interest of society to do basic research. And he argued that this will happen. But we just assume that it happens automatically, that we will do the research, and somehow automatically this will translate to social good. So now we understand. Now we're 75 years later. We need to reflect, and the answer was, well, yes, but it's not a smooth path. Just as we know that from research to development to technology to product, it's a complicated path, and it doesn't necessarily translate to the common good. And we also understand that technology also have adverse consequences. So now we understand that, oh, it's more complicated than that. But I don't think we in academia have come to grip with, well, we do the basic research, but we are the beneficiary of an investment by the public, because this is supposed to contribute at the end to the public good. It doesn't mean that every paper necessarily will have a public good consequence for that, okay? I mean, I've written papers that are very theoretical on dichotomies in consensus affection problem and complexity theory, and the translation from that to public good is not direct. But I don't think we have been trained to think we are all civil science, civil services. Where even I work for private institution. People think we are in a private institution. We own nothing to no one. We are all beneficiaries of public investment, and we need to take it with responsibility. And we need to start thinking at home. How does university need to look like? If the universities take a more serious responsibility to the social good. And I'm in discussion. I'm trying to convince my own institution that they need to take the social responsibility as their basic value. What is the purpose of higher education? I regard the purpose of higher education ultimately is the social good. It's an investment in what we call in social infrastructure. And we need to understand this is our role. And I don't think this has been on our mind. This is our role here. These are investment in social good, and we have responsibility. And again, it doesn't mean that every assignment used to say, and what is the social good of that? But we need to understand that these are all steps on the way to accepting our role in society. And I can get into the whole other issue here, which is, I think we are out of time, but the whole other issue in particular, not of public, but of private elite universities, and the role that they played in the current polarization of society. But that's a whole other talk.
Thank you.
Great. I really thank you, Moshe. Indeed, yeah, it's 1.5 hours after the start of your talk that I believe everybody enjoyed, and thank you for the time answering questions.
Everybody, be safe, be well. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.